Now let's get started with buttons. So buttons are one of the key features of a Bootstrap site, and buttons appear almost everywhere, from the toolbar to a sign up button. You can even use buttons as tabs, and you can use buttons for hiding a drop up or drop down menu. You can use buttons for almost everything. So let's start with a simple basic button, and there will be something like this. I'm going to show you how to create a very basic button, and then from then we'll move on to creating button groups and also creating button toolbars that contain several button groups. So let's get back to the course files over here. Let's open up blank, and I'm going to save this as buttons. Okay, and now let's open up a snippet for grids. You can of course find all the snippets here, but this is of course after all a course, so let's learn how to do it manually. I am however going to copy the grid. Okay, and I'm going to come back to buttons.html. I'm going to replace the paragraph here with a complete grid, and I'm going to create a split preview window, and as usual I'm going to make the fonts here bigger. Is that big enough? Alright, so let's get to creating a button. So in Bootstrap there are two ways you can create a button. Well, actually you can apply a button class to almost anything, but the two most popular ways are to actually use or to actually create a button, or you can convert an ordinary link, HTML link, into a button. And I prefer creating buttons from links because it's way more flexible that way. I can make it link to any other page that I want, and it looks exactly the same as adding a normal button in HTML. And since a lot of my work is about creating the mockup or the user interface for web applications that we want to develop, creating buttons as links really helps me tremendously to move fast. Okay, now let's start creating a button. So what you need to do is create any ordinary link, a href, href, oops, okay, http, and let's close that tag. Okay, so now you see an ordinary HTML link, and we are going to convert that into a button. So all you need to do is add the class of button, which is btn. Okay, and next you got to select the type of button. So there are several options for you to style your buttons, and the most common is to apply button default. And there you go. Now you have an actual button, and since we created a button from a link, alright, and we can actually make this link to within the page, an external site, whatever you want. Now there's one more thing that you have to do here, and Bootstrap recommends that you do it, which is to assign the role of a button to this link. Okay, there are no noticeable differences in terms of appearances, but in terms of the correct methodology of doing this, if you specify the role as a button, then other elements in Bootstrap will be able to recognize that as a button. Alright, so now that we have added the class button, button default, and role equals to button, and it looks like a button, it functions like a button. When you click down on it, you can see the differences. It's almost as if you are actually clicking down on a real button. Now let's try different classes to make this button look different. So buttons comes in 4 colors in Bootstrap. well, other than default, I'm sorry, 5 colors. So Bootstrap recommends that you use the button primary. And why the word primary here? Well, this is because buttons actually have a function, and by assigning the role of or the class of primary to it, you'll be able to create a primary action on your web application. For example, if you have a page and you want the sign up button to be the primary button, and the opt-in to or subscribe to our list to be the secondary button, then the primary button will actually be a bit more outstanding. Okay, and the other reason for this is that if you consistently stick to button primary for all the primary functions of your page, then later you can easily style this primary button to be red or purple or black or whatever you want to. Okay, but let's look at some of the other classes. Okay, so there's button info, and this is supposedly, well, actually used for info, for additional information. Now there's a button warning. Okay, and this is almost like saying, hey, if you want to click on this button, you better be careful. And next, there's button danger. Button danger is like, if you click this button, everything is going to self-destruct. Okay, it's the ultimate warning, and so it's red because, well, psychologically, I think when we see red, we are a bit more cautious. I don't know how true is that. And actually, anyway, you're free to use any color that you want to. If most of the buttons on your site are red, then you can just use button danger for everything, or you can use button primary for all the primary function buttons and then style it in your Bootstrap CSS to be red. Now there's another type of button here, which is button link. So button link, it looks, well, just like any other HTML link, all right, but it does have additional features that you can use when you create the role as a button, which is you can put it into groups and toolbars, which I will explain about that later. Now let's look at the different button sizes. Let me change this back to button primary. Okay, so there are different button sizes that you can use, and the one that you see here is actually the default size. So you can assign button.lg, LG is for large, and that makes the button large, as you can see here. All right, and you can assign button SM, that makes the button a little smaller, or if you want a really tiny button, you can put button XS, and now that's a really tiny button, almost looks like a label. So those are the 4 size classes that you can play around with. The defaults, of course, without any additional class for the size. And of course, before I forget, there's one more additional thing that you can do for a button, is that you can make it a block. And to do that, type in btn-block. Okay, a button block will span from left to right for the entire length of your column or whatever containing element that you happen to put a button in. So if I were to change this to column MD1, then the button will only span for one column. Let's change this column MD2. All right, so button block gain end to end, left to right, across the entire column or whatever element or div it happens to be in. And this can be useful in some cases, and in the lectures or in the tutorials for creating different versions of your site for desktop and for mobile. I will talk more about using button block, because it's really useful when you are dealing with small screen sizes to make sure that you have a consistent layout of buttons throughout your site. Okay, now let's add one more thing in our button, which is an icon. Okay, so I am using Font Awesome, which I explained in a separate lecture. Okay, now you have the shopping cart icon over here, and I'm going to change this from hello world. I'm going to change this to sign up now, and I am going to change it to the large button. Okay, and here you have it, the button that looks exactly like the one you see here. So that's all for this lecture, and in the next lecture I'm going to talk more about buttons, but we're going to go deeper. We're going to create button groups and button toolbars.